All right. I am just checking to make sure. Maybe there's a delay. Okay. All right. We are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the space. I am so happy that you're here. My name is Mikaila Brown, and I am the host of the podcast, Mikaila Unmuted. And this season is called Beyond a Mammy Mule and Maid, where I am committed to exploring the lives, identities, inner journeys of Black women. I just want to say I'm so happy to be here. I apologize for any tech difficulties. We were supposed to be at another link, but we made it over here, which is great. These three women sitting in front of you were featured in the second episode of the podcast. And if you haven't heard that episode, I'll make sure to add it to the description later. But these women are the perfect embodiment of courage, wisdom, and heart. You might have noticed if you got the flyer that I used the Wizard of Oz as a reference point for this episode, because as I was talking to them, I noticed so much in synergy with that. So we have the lion, the Tin Man, the scarecrow. But most importantly, in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy had everything she needed inside of her and didn't sometimes realize that. So she took a journey and a winding road. And so all of these women, the minute they hit this earth, were the smartest, the most compassionate, the bravest women. And what we learn in the podcast is they had to sometimes relearn themselves, take a journey through their lives, and we get to experience that with them. Also, just a frame of reference in case you haven't seen the second episode, I am telling these women's lives as a superhero story. And specifically, I'm using the framework of Joseph Campbell. He is a mythologist who wrote a book called A Hero of a Thousand Faces in 1949. And basically what he did is he looked at myths all over the world across all cultures, and he found the common threads in their origin story and how they progressed to become superheroes. And this book was so popular that almost every superhero movie that we watch today is based on this framework. The problem is that Joseph Campbell was a white man writing in 1949. So when we look at his framework contemporarily and through the lens of the lived experiences of Black women, it's a little bit lacking. So what I'm doing with the podcast is telling the stories of these women, using some of his framework and adapting those things that don't fit specifically for us. So if you hear us talking about Campbell or about the hero's journey, that's what we're referencing. Do check out the podcast if you want to learn more. One last thing before I introduce the ladies is, if you hear one thing that really resonates for you during this episode, I'm going to ask you to hit a like. If you hear two things you like, I'm going to ask you to subscribe. My goal is to continue to interview on YouTube Lives the amazing Black women that I'll be featuring for the rest of the season. And so now we're ready to start. So happy that you're here. I'm going to invite the ladies to go around and just introduce themselves. If you came to the last live, you are familiar with Ashanti. She and her mother and her grandmother did a 3-generational conversation in our first YouTube Live, and she's so gracious to be back with us. So Ashanti, if you want to start, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so my name is Ashanti. I am from the Baltimore area. I am in my late 20s. I may call myself a zillennial between Gen Z and millennial. And I'm really happy to be here and talk about my experiences and answer any questions anybody may have.
Christina, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina. I'm Gen Z, not a millennial, though I do relate to some of the things, so I understand. I'm also in my 20s, my mid 20s. I'm learning every day. Even the other day, I just learned more insurance terms. So, yeah, that's just about me.
I can jump in next.
Great.
I am Charlotte. I'm based in Baltimore. I grew up in Philly. I'm very much a millennial. So I'm in my mid-30s now. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm a Joseph Campbell fan as an anthropology nerd, and also recognize the ways that a lot of the frameworks that we have are limiting to more expansive identities.
Yeah, great. Charlotte, I figured you would be the one to know Joseph Campbell. Christina and Ashanti, have you ever heard of A Hero's Journey? Ever spoken about, ever?
I do not believe so.
Okay. Okay, well, if you stay with the podcast all season, we will see all 12 steps of his framework told through the lens of Black women. So that will be exciting.
Perfect.
All right, so the first question I have is, I didn't even know when I told your story that I was going to be telling a superhero story. And so I wondered what you all thought about that. Were you surprised to see your life through that lens? And specifically, we talk a lot about your childhood. At the beginning of Joseph Campbell's framework, he talks about how most superheroes grow up. And interestingly enough, if you think about most superhero stories, they have very easy breezy, Joan Cleaver type childhoods. And we know as Black women, even if we have strong families, which you all do, there's so many societal issues that do come up when you think about your childhood. Like, it's not only your home that you're cultivated in. And Joseph Campbell doesn't really talk about that too much in his framework. So first question is, what was it like hearing your story as a superhero story? And how did you receive hearing your childhood told back to you from somebody else? And anyone can jump in.
I would love to start because I used to really not be into superhero movies at all. And then found myself on a lot of flights in the last 4 years, going back and forth to like South America and Africa for journey work, and coming out of these really intense journeys and experiences. And then the thing that's most available on flights are superhero movies. And so I started going through like a lot of Marvel and other, I don't even remember the name, but the main superhero sort of movies. And I feel like that is something that I actually did notice, was that most of the characters, maybe it's not to the extreme that we experience it as Black women and Black people in the US especially, but that there had to be a childhood tension that led to this sort of coming home or remembering, and that's like a key part of the mythos. And that actually a lot of superhero movies also have a lot of mystical aspects to them. There's a lot of ritual, there's like references to animism and all these other pieces. And I think when you sent it to me, I responded to you and said, oh, this sounds like an ethnography, knowing your our shared anthro background. I was like, oh, it's a really interesting way to approach a podcast, in finding the way to link our stories together through the archetypes of the hero's journey and the phases of the hero's journey. And yeah, I mean, we recorded that at the end of last year, I think.
Yeah, we recorded at the end of last year. Yeah.
And so it was really interesting for my own integration to hear back like where I was and how you were able to reflect the way in which something that seems to be or is a challenge then becomes a gift and a superpower.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Ashanti, Christina, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I actually also did not grow up or watch a ton of superhero movies. I've never really been into superhero movies. In adulthood, I started watching a little bit more Marvel and everything. So I didn't have as much of a frame of reference when it came to the origin stories and everything. So it was a learning experience really for me to hear my own story told back in a way that could be seen as my superhero start. And it was really, I think the child in me was like, oh yay, go me, and really resonated with that. So hearing it was in a way like hearing an origin story for the first time for me, because I don't know that I've seen one. So yeah.
I love that. Christina?
And for me, see, I have watched like all the superhero movies in the past and know about the background, but for me, I thought it was really important to be able to see Black women through that lens, because there's only but so many Black superheroes in the mainstream. So hearing it in someone's everyday life just shows how important it is to have that courage, the wisdom, the heart to speak up, speak out, say things, and fight for a change.
Yeah, I think as Black women, we talk a lot about being unprotected. You know, that famous Malcolm X quote is something we talk about a lot. But for me, one of my deepest wounds is the thanklessness for the sacrifices that we make as Black women. I think people don't appreciate what it feels like to be on the bottom of the social ladder. And so, because they don't appreciate what that experience is, they don't realize how hard we work all the time and how committed we are to saving others. And so oftentimes it's so thankless. And so I wanted this podcast to be a love letter to Black women. And so what better way for it to be a love letter than to platform what heroines we are. When we think about our childhood, what I thought was so interesting is that the influences that you have as a childhood can be in your home. And I think in Charlotte's story, I talked a lot about her relationship with her mother and, you know, growing up in a white community. And then with Christina and Ashanti, it's very interesting because Christina had a story where she was in pre-K and was kind of treated like she wasn't the smartest bulb, which is funny because now she's on her way to getting her PhD. And then Ashanti was a child athlete. And so you had a coach that was very significant. And so I want to talk a little bit about the influences that kind of shaped your childhood. And I think I want to start with Ashanti because Ashanti has a really strong family, which you'll see if you listen to the first episode and you see the first live. And so by all estimations, Ashanti, your life should have been a cakewalk because you stand on the shoulders of such amazing Black women and men as well, right? But then you have this coach who you feel really embedded with. And so I wanted to talk to you as you reflected on rehearing that story of being a childhood gymnast and how entwined your relationship was with that coach and how she didn't notice how much pain you were in as you grew in the sport. Can you talk about her influence on you and how that continues to influence you now?
Absolutely. Yes. So to give a little bit of context, I started gymnastics when I was 2 years old, and I was put on the competitive track by the time I was 5. And my coach, who was a white woman, or is a white woman, she was about 22 years old. And so we essentially grew up together. By the time I retired from gymnastics, I was 15. So she was in her early 30s. We did a lot of growing up together, and she even, like our families were pretty close. She actually babysat me and my brothers a couple times when my parents traveled. And she and I was the youngest athlete in my level. And so the way that gymnastics works is that you are split up based on your level and then your age. And so everybody else was a little bit older than me. So that meant she and I were alone at meets together often. We would travel up and down the East Coast together. And so we spent a lot of together. And so that's obviously very different being with a white woman for pretty much half of my childhood and then spending the other half at home with, you know, with my family. And so I think that I'm still unraveling the ways in which having had this white woman so strongly in my life, I'm still unraveling and I guess I should say managing how that has influenced my life, because I'm still trying to figure out what ways exactly that has influenced and affected me, and still, you know, sitting in my identity as a Black woman, having honestly been partially raised by a white woman as well. She was I consider her like an aunt, older sister type thing. And then she also not only was she my coach, she was also my mentor, because I continued into coaching in gymnastics as well. So she was a mentor for me. And so there was a lot of enmeshment with that. And I'm still doing a lot of unraveling with that. But when I did leave the sport, she was surprised. And I was like, why are you surprised? You know, we knew each other so well. And so I was like, why is this surprising for you? I feel like it's very clear that I have been unhappy, that I am no longer in love with the sport anymore. So, you know, learning together, and we have since in adulthood for me, tried to reconnect and establish a different type of relationship as I work to unravel, you know, what all of that meant for me growing up.
Thank you. I want to speak to that, but I do want to ask a question. Am I having feedback, Christina and Ashanti, you hear a ton of
A lot.
feedback. All right, so
I think you need to mute when other people.
That's what I'm going to do. So I'll get up and touch it and unmute. So I'm so sorry about the feedback if people have been hearing feedback so far. Ashanti, I just want to say really quickly that I think when I listened to your story, I thought about the medical industry and how often Black women's pain is ignored or seen as not as significant as the pain of others. And so you were in pain and probably it was very obvious, but there's this almost assumption because Black women are so strong that we can carry the pain. So there might be an acknowledgement the pain's there, but there's also this feeling of they can handle it. It's not a problem for them. Yeah. And so I really thought of that when I heard your story.
Well, and I think it's a double whammy. And if you think about the toxicity of gymnastics in the early 2000s, so there was a lot of expectation to push through in the sport. And then on top of it being a Black woman. And I can specifically remember an instance where it was clear I was in pain when I was running down the vault runway. And she noticed it then, but it was just kind of like, yeah, but keep going. So, yeah.
Sorry, y'all. We did not have this problem last time we did a live. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm still learning how to do these. So I'll just keep getting up and muting and unmuting. But Christina, I want to talk a little bit about that experience in preschool. What's so interesting is Christina, what I call a Gen Z gangster. Like I met her in a professional setting. And so she reads as very quiet. So you could be in a meeting with her and she says nothing. But then I would get an email from her boss being like, I'm afraid of Christina. I'd be like, what's going on? So it's so interesting to know you as a Gen Z gangster, but then also know very early you had this experience where your voice was quashed. So can you talk a little bit about what that experience was and how it impacted you? And then how it might impact you even now.
Well, during that experience, I was basically in like this pre-K program thing, and it was pretty much like school. So we learned how to read, write, do math. Well, not like math, but you know what I mean. And I remember so vividly, even to this day, and even when we back into the interview of, we had like this book. And I remember thinking, okay, yeah, I don't think I'm good at like reading aloud, but I understand the story. I know every word on the page. I'm not understanding why I'm in a group where reading is taking so much slower in comparison to my peers. And I think that taught me a lot back then, that sometimes people don't see you for where you are. And even back in that professional setting, I felt that way a lot, where it's like I'm growing, I'm doing all these things, and it's like, but you're not seeing the work or my contributions. So of course I'm going to be like, oh hey, I'm gonna speak out and be like, send an email, especially so you can have a paper trail, and be like, hey, what's going on with that? Like, how would you feel about me having a promotion? And I know I may come off quiet, but I think it's all about being, I don't know a good enough word, but I guess being deliberate and saying, like, knowing when the moment is to speak, when it is to wait, when it's like, you know what, I'm going to put that on paper so that way they know I'm being serious. So, yeah.
All right. Now, Charlotte, you're so interesting because there is a lot of conversation online about biracials and white mom biracials, to be specific, and how low their racial self-esteem is. And so what I love about your story is that you are mixed race with a white mother. And since I've known you, you're one of the people that I know with the highest racial self-esteem. And so what do you think about that phenomenon? Do you believe it to be true as someone who actually occupies that community? And if you do think it's true that white moms show up differently for biracial children than Black moms, what do you think made the difference for you and how you were able to cultivate such a high racial self-esteem?
Yeah, I mean, I have very mixed feelings. I think a lot of the rhetoric around biraciality in this moment is really just feeding into the myth of separation, and it's like having Jollof wars. Like, it's an internet thing. Obviously, typically, phenomena that we see is based in some truth, and so I have absolutely, interacted with, um, and can sense the difference in biracial women who have had white moms and black moms, biracial people in general. I mean, I've dealt with a lot of racial imposter syndrome over the course of my life. And so I think it's interesting. I feel very inherently connected to my Africanness. We share also some lineage, and that my dad is from Jamaica. And at one point in time was a practicing Rastafari, which is, I would say, a tradition that carries unity consciousness at the center without the like spiritual bypassing that a lot of other unity consciousness traditions, well, really the way they're interpreted in modern times, the way that unity consciousness is used to like erase difference. And somebody sent me some Amber Rose clip the other day where she's talking about the secret biracial meetings, and I was just like, yuck. Like, thank goodness you're not that biracial person. I mean, I've received many very interesting comments around my biracial identity from others my whole life. I mean, quite regularly, in fact. Yeah, I do find it to be a way in which we replicate systems of separation with each other. Not to say that my experience was not different, it was vastly different, but I also wouldn't want a white woman to teach me about Black womanhood, right? So my mom, I would say, like, she was seeing this idea of you're not Black, you're not white, you're Charlotte as a freedom, as a gift, which carries its privilege again in how I was able to not have like as rigid an understanding of race. I also don't have, my Black parent is not African American, so I also there was not like a connection to the predominant narrative of Blackness that is here in the United States, because we were an immigrant family and an Afro-Caribbean family. But I also appreciate that my mom wasn't faking it. Like, she wasn't trying to erase the fact that she's not Black and she's not going to be the one that's teaching me about Black womanhood. And she certainly, I would say, did her best for the era in which I was growing up to not isolate me from it. And that when my interest moved towards my Africanness, that there wasn't a pushback to that. I think it sometimes has gotten, we've had our moments where I'm sure that she feels unseen, just like as a mother. Like, yes, you are my Black daughter. Also, I gave you life. So like, there's a level of respect that needs to be held regardless, because we come from the lineage of women. But there was not like a lot of celebration of whiteness in our house, I would say. And so it left a lot of room for me to be curious and to allow my path to unfold in this deep reconnection to African remembrance that I have now, or have always had, but I have had more opportunity to deepen in my adulthood.
Charlotte, that's so powerful, because I think one of the reasons why the Black community can sometimes have these conversations is that we're not having it with biracial people, or maybe we're not listening to biracial people. And so there's things that you just said that I've never really considered. And so I appreciate that insight so very much.
I'd also add a historical piece to it,
Please.
specifically to the context of the United States and in comparison to our historical context of Jamaica. So, for example, in Jamaica, if a person who was enslaving Africans had a child, assaulted and had a child with their the enslaved African women on their property. I'm like, what's the best way to say this that does not censor the colonizer? That child was free. So that child was able to start building social mobility off of the plantation. They were not owned anymore. In the United States, the sickness is that that child was then enslaved, and that child's father was then their owner. And I think that changes a lot of then the way that Black communities feel about biracial people, because there's obviously then at the end of enslavement, there was like some privilege that came with being of lighter complexion, of having some proximity to whiteness. But like that is a sickness of the enslavement that is very specific to these lands that was not happening in the Caribbean in the same way. And that I think is like an important, because when you go to Jamaica, people aren't talking about biraciality in the same way. When you go to South Africa, they're not talking about it in the same, when you go, right? So there is something very specific about the tension of biraciality in Black communities here in the US. But I'm like, we literally would have been enslaved alongside you. So why is there so much rejection of biracial folks as Black in many instances?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you're right. It makes me want to, what I want to talk about now is what I loved in telling your stories. You see the patterns, right? Like you see a problem that you had as a childhood, and then we see how you resolve it in adulthood. So I want to kind of bridge us now to adult you. And so I'll start with Ashanti again. Ashanti, I picked you as a person with heart. Who is that? Tin Man? Tin Man didn't have a heart, right? Yeah, okay. So you're the Tin Man in my podcast episode, because in many ways you lost your love, not only for the sport, but for your body, because it was in so much pain. And I loved when you spoke about now as an adult, how much your relationship with your body and sport is not through the lens of perfectionism. And even you working in the space of athleticism with small children and really instilling that in them. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit in particular how you're overcoming your inner perfectionist, because I think as Black women, we really, really struggle with that, because so many of us feel that if we're not perfect, we won't be accepted. And so if you could share a little bit about that, it'd be so helpful.
Yeah. So another bit of a double whammy, I guess, is the perfectionism, because obviously in gymnastics, we're constantly striving for perfection. And, you know, the quote most people say is practice makes perfect. In our gym on the wall, it said perfect practice makes perfect. So not only was because in adulthood, I've been trying to figure out what part of me is striving for perfectionism because of gymnastics, because of society, or is it just because of who I am? And so that has also been something that I have worked with in myself in trying to unravel this perfectionism. And it's been a long and I don't want to say slow, but kind of slow process for me, because for as long as I can remember, I've been a perfectionist, and I've tried to be perfect in every area of my life. When I left gymnastics, that perfectionism shifted into my schoolwork, and I wouldn't accept anything less besides straight A's all through college. And I think I even said at one point on the podcast, when my brother graduated from high school, I was like, I'm going to be highest honors and I'm going to be in the National Honor Society. And I put all these expectations on myself to be perfect or to excel. And now I'm like, for what? And for who was I trying, for who was I trying to do that for? And so in adulthood, it's just, I'm always just trying to find a balance now. And so when I was a kid and I was doing gymnastics, I was aiming for that perfectionism. And then it shifted into school, aiming for perfectionism. And now I'm just realizing I just need to show up and be my best self and do the best, whatever that looks like that day, and being okay with that. And so as I've gotten into adulthood, how do I want to word this? My mentality has really started to shift, and I don't have to be perfect all the time to be accepted. People are, me just showing up as my best self is enough. And now I'm not striving to be, have my body be perfect in a certain way, or to be perfect in everything that I do at work, or to even be, some ways I find it showing up for me is when I go to the gym and I'm just working out, because now I work out because I love it. I am a big advocate for just, healthy lifestyle living, and, movement as medicine, all of that. And so I exercise now just because I love it, and because it is something that helps lift me up. But even in my gym regimen now, I find myself trying to be perfect in those moments sometimes. And I'm like, take a step back. We're not in, the gymnastics gym anymore. It's okay if your workout isn't, you're not sweating bullets every single time. It's okay if, you're not performing your best. And so just reminding myself that it's okay. I'm not, still 12 years old trying to qualify for the next competition. I'm not trying to be perfect with everything that I'm doing. I'm just trying to show up and be the best version of myself that I can be. And I try to, with the athletes and the kids that I work with now, I'm just telling them, control your controllables. You can, control what's within you, what you can do, how you can show up the best way for yourself and for others. And, my love for gymnastics, it's still there. I left the sport. I didn't love it anymore. But I found a new love for it in coaching, and in being a sports medicine professional, and being the person that I wish that I had in my corner. And I think that my athletes really value that too, because they have the coaches, they have their parents, they have themselves, everybody else in their ear telling them, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I'm that person that I wish that I had, that's saying, it's okay if you can't be all those things at once. You show up as you, and you do the best that you can do, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. Christina, you were told young untruth about yourself. And so one of the decisions you made was, when I am in public, I will be quiet because that's safer than owning my truth. I thought it was so interesting because I only know you as an introvert, but that story you tell about being in the hospital and saying hi to everyone, I'm like, that's my Christina doing that. I love it. What I think is really powerful is you have this professor at Hampton who says to you, you can't be quiet here. And I'm sure there's a lot of introverts that get told, speak up, you can't be hide here. But you flip that so well, to the point that even when you were using your voice and being bullied by upperclassmen, you still used your voice. What do you think was that turning point for you? What was it that that professor ignited in you, or what she did that inspired you to step outside of your comfort zone of, I am safe when I am silent?
I think one thing, it really resonated with me because I kind of had been feeling that way prior to going to Hampton in high school, being like, "Oh, I wish I would have said that," or I wish I would have spoke up more and said more of my thoughts in order to, let's say, get better things done or people to know me better. So when she said that in class that day, I was like, you know what? You're right. I didn't come to Hampton to be the same person I was well, maybe like 3 months ago when I graduated high school. I wanted to come to Hampton and be the best version of myself. And I didn't really know what that looked like at the time. So I was like, you know what? Let me try speaking up and saying how I really felt, or even just doing simple things like speaking up in class more, because I'm like, oh, I don't know what the answer is, but I have a good guess. And then after I started speaking up after a while, I was like, you know what? Yes, you do have the answer. It's within you. You know the right things. You just have to trust your gut and speak up. So even in the situation when I was the yearbook editor, and I will admit I made a lot of mistakes. Guilty, guilty. And for me, I felt it more as like a learning curve than like oh, she's dumb, she doesn't know what she's doing. And it's like, I mean, that's kind of true, but I'm also learning, I'm growing. So that's why when I corrected them, especially a lot to the seniors, I'm like, hey, I'm a sophomore. I'm still learning this college thing. I'm learning still how to be a person. So it just taught me a lot to like frame things as, I understand what you're saying, but here's my perspective. Let me speak on that. Let me say my piece so you understand where I'm coming from. And it's not coming from a place of like, oh, I'm trying to ruin their senior year. I'm trying to ruin their yearbook and blah. It's like, no, I was lost in the sauce and I'm sorry. And I'm going to do better next year, and which I did for years following. So yeah.
I think that's what I love the most about Gen Z and millennials too. They're much more. I'm an exennial, and your fearlessness, your courageousness, your like don't give a fuckness if people don't agree with what you're doing. For me, there have been times I've sat in meetings and been afraid of the things that Gen Z are saying because in my mind I couldn't conceptualize it as safe, and it is safe. Like people just accept it because they come with the energy of like, this is my truth, I'm not negotiating it. And so I take so much inspiration from your generation and millennials too, because y'all are so gangster. Like y'all are really, really gangster. All right,
No,
Charlotte. Oh, go ahead, Christina.
I'm about to say, yeah, I definitely agree that we are, and I think that's the best part about our generations is that we've been seeing the world as it is, and it's like going, it's like, you know what, I'm not feeling this direction. Let's change it. Or even during 2020, like with George Floyd, it's like, you know what, it's about time enough is enough. Let's get onto the streets and show people, like, yeah, we're done. So, yeah.
All right, Charlotte. What I loved about doing the interview with you is that you pushed and stretched me in ways that I didn't anticipate as the interviewer. When you talked about expanding and pushing and breaking down identities, at first it made me really uncomfortable. And to be honest, I had to listen to our interview like 10 times before I could get what you were saying. And I realized that because existentially I was resistant to it, because we speak about racial identity and expanding it. In some ways, it's very liberatory because it gives you belonging, it gives you a place in a really chaotic world. And then what you spoke about is, but it also boxes us in, right? It holds us into characteristics that might not be ours. And I think one of the most amazing things about your interview was hearing about your college experience and how you got to have a very distinct college experience, different from the other Black students at Johns Hopkins, because you weren't hemmed in by this is what it means to be a Black student at Johns Hopkins. And so if you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear where you are with that. I'd love to hear you talk about it, because I don't think there's enough Black people exploring these ideas. I think, and you've read so many scholars and theorists who have contemplated these ideas. They're not new in the scholarly lane, but I don't necessarily hear it spoken about in like common conversation. And as we look at systems being deconstructed now and everything that's happening politically globally, this is the perfect time to kind of have those conversations. So I'd love for you to share where you are with that, because I know you were exploring that within yourself as well. Tell me what comes up for you when I bring up that topic.
Yeah, I did appreciate in the episode that you were like, yeah, this is not a new concept that she's bringing forth, because I could sense the the discomfort in our conversation. And like it's been an incredibly uncomfortable process for me as well. So it's not that I think I was like landing into greater acceptance of it and the way that it can be used in a liberatory sense. But certainly the onset of that sort of phase of integration was quite uncomfortable for me as well, especially as a person that teaches on decolonization and is a healing justice practitioner and has worked in harm reduction in Baltimore City for years. And, all these things that are so impacted by race and identity and gender. that it's been a road to be able to play with identity in those ways. But I do think that when we like really look into Black scholarship, that is what a lot of our elders have been saying for a long time, is that we, from a place of desired protection as well, we sometimes overly accept the external narrative about who we are, as Black peoples in the Americas, as Black women. And it's interesting because in this conversation, there's so many things where I'm like, these are challenges that transcend the identity of Black womanhood. They are amplified here by that identity, and there's no denying that. And I think that's like where I land in the conversation, is like these limited understandings of our identity are limited and largely framed from an external narrative of what it is to be a Black woman. But there are also things that like in our consensus reality are accepted and have a large impact. So like being a Black woman amplifies all of these challenges that are modern human challenges. And it puts like a different spin and lens on them. And so it's not helpful for us to deny that, and to deny that that impacts the lens that we see, through which we see the world. And when we come to certain places, maybe in our healing journey, where we've been, like grown the capacity for our internal sense of safety, that there is more space to start to question, okay, what if this is actually constructed by me, and what if this has been put on me by others, and ultimately don't serve my liberation or our liberation as Black peoples. And obviously this conversation, or this topic, has been particularly present in my household as we prepare to parent a Black child. My husband is Black. I am Black. We will have a Black child. I'm very excited about that. I didn't think that I would like necessarily have kids, but I was like, yeah, if I'm going to have children, I hope that it is with, I love being Black. So I hope that it is with a fellow Black person that I get to parent. But we have been talking about like, what is the way that we will talk about identity in our home, and what is the way that we will talk about race in our home? What has been helpful to us and what has been harmful to us, and where do we have opportunities to model what it is to be in a more expansive Blackness, one that is rooted in resiliency and honors the intergenerational trauma that we carry, but doesn't hyper focus on it as the foundation of our identity. And I'm sure this will also cause some discomfort for people, but like, how do we not pass along a victim narrative? Again, not bypassing the experiences and the atrocities that our ancestors faced in being forced to this place, but also recognizing that like that is not the completeness of our story. That is not a wholeness of our story. That what we're experiencing now, when we think about truly like the long stretch that is history from the dawn of humanity, like what we're in is an actual blip. And it feels like everything right now. And we can't ignore what's happening, but it's also not our entire inheritance. And it's really important for my husband and I to find the ways that we instill that in our child and hold that in ourselves. And, I think we're in a crisis of belonging right now. We're like in an epidemic of loneliness, which is the flip side of that, is a crisis of belonging. We've all been stripped of the benefits of the village, and many of us find ways to recreate it. Many of us have strong family units, or maybe grew up in strong communities, so we like get a glimpse of it. But we don't have like, yeah, we don't have rites of passage, we don't have initiations, and the way in which people live and experience Blackness is so diverse. Like, if we think globally, it is so diverse. It is not a monolith. And I'm curious how we make space for all of that narrative to be able to coexist without being in these wars of identity with each other that are externally imposed. Coming back to the biracial conversation, right? Like, that is a narrative that white enslavers put on us, and like was a tactic to separate us. And then out of our own, Frantz Fanon, one of my favorites, talks about like the internalization of colonization, right? And so like then as a form of protection, we take that on and then we replicate that shit on each other. And I'm really interested in not how we replicate as a way to feel like we're getting a sense of power, but how we actually eliminate. I don't want to gain power so that I can be racist towards white people, right? Like, which is not, I'm not talking about reverse racism. There is a power piece and a differential that would have to occur. But yeah, I don't want to like flip the script and decolonize so I can be racist to white people. I want to get rid of racism. Like, I want to eliminate it. So if I'm enacting it on my fellow Black folks, then I'm not really in a deep integrity with my practice of decolonization and my practice of what it is to expand my understanding of Blackness.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation, and thank you for starting off and trusting me with it, even in my discomfort. But what came up for me when you were talking is a lot of times when I'm working on the podcast, I think people will listen to it and say, this is the human experience. Why are you telling it as a Black woman experience? And I think it's because sometimes the experience of being a Black woman is to be dehumanized. So to tell our story, even if it is a human experience, is to reclaim power that has been taken away from us, right? So like, yeah, oh, that happens to everybody who's LGBTQIA, cool, but did you realize that? Because I feel sometimes as Black women, to the point of like our pain is not weighed the same, right? Or our intelligence or the way we interject is not weighed the same. There is this feeling of dehumanization. So sometimes retelling our story as a Black woman's story that highlights our humanism is the activism. Just to remind people, I do think a majority of the people who listen to this podcast are going to be Black women, but I'm hopeful that there will be allies who listen and think, oh, I didn't look past the facade of she has it all together. She signs up for everything when it needs to be signed up for. She always has an answer. She never cries. Like, my hope is that you hear the story and you think, oh, I have more in common with this person than I thought. Because to your point, even Black women, so much of our identity is tied to things that are so detrimental to us. Like, we're so boxed in by that identity that it often leaves human outside of it.
I would add all of that. And sometimes I have to ask myself, like, who am I trying to convince? Like, yes to all of those things. And also, how much energy am I spending in trying to remind people of my humanity? You don't want to see it? I'm not spending my energy. I think Christina said it earlier about discernment, or like determining when and where you speak up and advocate for yourself. And I think that's been like one of the biggest parts of my healing journey. This is like so beautiful. You're sharing our stories from our perspectives, and there's beauty in that. And then sometimes in these conversations, I'm like, well, who are we doing this for? And how many times do we have to try to convince them that we're human? Like, and how much energy do I want to spend on that? Like, there are a lot of conversations that I'm willing to engage with people, but if we're coming to it and you don't see humans as humans, then I'm not really, we're not coming at a shared starting place, and that's not the convincing work that I have the energy or is my responsibility to take on either.
Yeah, I super receive that. One of my favorite quotes is that Maya Angelou quote that like, part of racism is to distract you by having you do all these things to prove yourself so that you don't use your energy to do the things on the other side. I think what's really scary for me when I sit with my discomfort around this conversation, it's like, We don't know what's on the other side. Colonial history is so long that to like live in a world where you didn't care what people in power thought, it leaves this vacuum up. I think what I'm trying to say is oftentimes people of color, Black people, Black women are explaining themselves to others with the perception that it will keep them safer. That is 100% not true. We are not safer, right? But I think there's a fear sometimes to not make that explanation, because if your body is programmed to believe if you don't explain, you will die, it's really hard to override that when you don't know what not explaining looks like on the other side. Does that make sense? And so like that's the tension. I do think, you know, that's the point of white supremacy, right? To always keep us thinking on the other side, there's a void that's worse than what we're doing to you. So like play this game with us because at least you know the rules. And I do feel, again, as we watch so many things that we thought we knew, the veil being lifted in the last like 5 years, and especially the last 2, I think there's so much discomfort for people in the world because it's like, what is it going to look like next? Like, what will it look like after Trump? What will it look like? Where are we going with this? Because that's completely new and that's completely fresh and that's completely scary. Christina or Ashanti, did you want to say anything to this conversation? You okay? Christina, did you want to say anything?
I agree with a lot of what you and Charlotte have been talking about. I think, again, centering decolonization, especially from all of our stories, it's kind of like intertwined. Like, you don't have to say, okay, this is my identity and I have to convince you. I don't have to speak up for you to say, hey, are you going to give me a promotion? Are you going to give me a raise? No, I'm going to leave. And then, like, I don't have to be gymnastics. I don't have to be this sport. I am a person outside of this. In fact, I'm so much so that I reframed it and I'm making it better for others. So I think that's a big point of like this podcast, hearing our stories, things of that nature.
Okay, now I do want to say something because Christina, you actually made me think with now for me with work, because going off of that, I have a little bit of imposter syndrome and such at work. And so, yeah, I don't need to explain myself. Just me showing up as who I am, that's enough. And so I don't owe anybody an explanation. And my mom had said to me once, when I don't know, somebody had said something to me that I took offense to, and she was basically like, she was like, you know that that's not true. You know your own truth. She was like, if somebody called you a big purple elephant with pink polka dots, would you be offended? No, because you know that that's not true. And so she's like, stick with, you know, what you know to be true about yourself, so that you don't let you know, other people try to tell you who you are.
Just to nerd out real quick about this, I think a term that would be really helpful in this moment is neurocolonization, which is essentially how colonization impacted the nervous system. And the nervous system, when it feels unsafe, feels the need to defend and convince. And so part of what's happening also generationally is that we're healing our nervous systems to be like, no, I will remove myself. And that's it, right? Like, I don't have to be here to convince you. I don't have to be here to defend my identity to you. I'm gonna remove my energy from this place, or you know, conversation. So yeah, that's something that I've been like getting deeper into, is beyond just the like intellectual internalization of colonization, is like how it shows up in our bodies, and how when we tend to that, we're able to then come into spaces from this more regulated place. Regulated not meaning calm all of the time, but just regulated in this like, okay, I can speak up now, and now I'm not going to use my energy to do that. So yeah, I just hear that like theme coming through in this conversation.
I want to remind anyone who's watching the live that you can put in a comment and I'll make sure that the guests on the stage see it. So we have about 6 more minutes before we wrap up. And I'm going to say something real quick. And if you're thinking you want to share something, please take this moment to write in into the chat. But I think there's also another step that's even further than what we're talking about, is that not only do we have to remove ourselves from those spaces, but we as Black women have to build something new. And I feel like that's even less in the conversation. Like if we are disavowing this existing system, then what are we making in its absence for ourselves? And that there's agency for us, even though supposedly we're at the bottom of the social ladder, to build something. And I think what's so amazing is, I know almost every corporate environment I've worked in, the hardest working person was a Black woman. Like the amount of meetings I sat in and no one spoke because they knew the Black woman would be like, yup, I'll do it, I'll take it, because no one else volunteered. And so if there's any group that's more prepared to build something for themselves, I think it's us, because we've been building things for other people for so long. And so the last question I want to ask, is, I'm just checking the chat. Okay. The last question that I want to ask is, what are you building? What's next for you? What agency are you using? And Charlotte, you kind of landed on this, talking about, your baby and what's coming next, but all of you are at new beginnings. Ashanti's getting married soon, and Christina just got a new job. She's about to start applying to PhD programs. What are you building for yourself that's just yours?
That can happen. A human, which is a wild and existential journey. Very sci-fi and ancestral at the same time. And that I would say have leaned into in the last, especially 18 months, is like, okay, the world is going to shit, but that's what it feels like. I think we're like in a burning and blooming. So, but like, what is the state of my village? What is the state of my relationships? Do I feel good about them? Do they nourish me? And when everything else is falling apart, like, I don't know. It's like, I think forces us into a deeper sense of gratitude for simple things, which is kind of how humans used to exist. That we didn't have a view of what was happening to 8 billion other people on a daily basis. We had, when we opened our door, who was on either side of us and who was inside our home. And so, yeah, I would say that on a personal level. And then, we've met through the medicine space and spaces like Kindred, or I run a microdosing group for Afro-descendant women, and I run a training program for clinical and ceremonial facilitators to like actually carry these values of decolonization, to embody these values of decolonization. And I think similarly to what you observed, Christina, about Ashanti, is like, okay, I had this experience, it didn't serve me, I removed myself, and now I get to come back to it to ensure that the next generation has a different experience than I do. Does that mean that you're like constantly running around with a sign that was like, I experienced racism in the gymnastics world and you're not going to now? Like, not necessarily, right? But and similarly, like, I experienced a bunch of racial imposter syndrome and lack of belonging, so now I make these things. It's just like, you allow your experience to inform your creation, and you through that make, as you're saying, the world that you want to see and live in, and you want the next generations to see and live in. And it doesn't need to be that much more complex.
Yeah, and I would say that I'm continuing to build the life that I want to live. And some days that changes, what I envision that life being like. And so there are things that have stayed constant. And to go off of what Charlotte was saying, the village, that's something that's really important to me and my fiance, is having a village. We are very cognizant of the fact that in this era, they're trying to strip us of the village. And actually, we just had my cousin, who is married and has a toddler, they actually just moved into our house. And it's a way of the village. We're supporting each other financially, trying to, move up to the next step in our lives, but really leaning on the village to try to build the lives that we all want to be able to create. And so some days I'm building towards and wanting to get my PhD. Other days, I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. And so, it looks a little bit different some days, but as long as I'm leaning into what's in alignment with where I am, maybe, that day or this month or this season, I'm just leaning into whatever is in alignment for me in that moment. And so village for sure is a constant, but just building the life that resonates with me and is something that I'm happy and at peace and in contentment with.
See, that's the question that you're asking, Dr. Brown, is such a big question. And I think maybe because I'm a little bit younger, I'm like, but my gut instinct is saying, just meeting more people. I feel like I'm still, or even like always, just keeping that thing in my life of meeting people to connect, have various experiences. I mean, meeting Ashanti and Charlotte, I would have never known, especially seeing them in the street or just seeing them in a random cafe. This is their life story. This is what they've been through. So just keeping up with that and hearing people's life stories, because that's what I love to hear too.
I want to thank the three of you so very much. I feel like I met each of you on a page in your life, and you gave me chapters and let me share your life in chapters. And it's so beautiful, to your point, Christina, to know all of you in a more well-rounded way. Thank you for giving me your time and your story, and thank you for today's conversation. I did not know it would veer into Afrofuturism, but I love that it did. That felt really nice and really juicy, and I feel like we had a conversation not a lot of people are having publicly, so thank you for that. I want to thank anyone who stayed and listened. Apologies for tech issues and sound issues. Thanks for sticking it out. I think this conversation was worth it. Please do check out the podcast to hear these women's stories in more detail. And I hope everyone will continue to have these conversations with their family and friends this Friday evening. Talk about some of the stuff we talked about and what you think about it and where you stand on it. And let's keep this conversation going. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for being here. Thank you, Charlotte, Christina, and Ashanti. I appreciate and adore you three so very much. I hope everyone has a very great day.
Thank you for having us. It was wonderful to be with y'all.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.